Nice to see you all. We're here today to stand up for trust in our elections. People being secure about the vote is probably the most important thing in our representative system of government. And there's several bills that we want to speak about and we think that people in Rhode Island should be cognizant of and speak to their representatives about. The first is a good bill, and that's brought forward by Brian Newberry, and that requires the Secretary of State to take action to clean up our voter rolls, having our state law line up with the federal motor voter law, where essentially if there's two pieces of mail that are unreturned and someone doesn't vote in two federal elections, we would require the Secretary of State to then remove that person from the voting roll. That law has been upheld in Ohio as constitutional. We think it makes a lot of sense here in Rhode Island, where recent studies have shown that we have hundreds of thousands more people on the voter rolls than our census should allow. We know the Secretary of State is trying to clean up our voter rolls, but we think that she needs to be more aggressive about it, and it should be required in law, not something that's up to the discretion of an elected official. I know that when I send out mailers, I sometimes get some back, and this is during the campaign, and I see someone on the voter roll, and I know that person hasn't lived on Block Island in 10 to 15 years, sometimes more. So it's something that for people to have faith in our system, they need to know that our voter rolls are clean and up to date, especially when we're sending out mail ballot applications to every active voter. There's two other issues which I think are important, and this is something that we are going to oppose. The first is the proposed elimination of voter ID. That's something there's a strong drive for here in this state. I want to briefly take you back to 2010. One of the impetuses for requiring voter ID was when a representative, someone in that building, showed up to vote and they had already voted apparently. Someone had voted under their name, and that was someone from Providence, and that spurred the movement for voter ID in this state, and it passed the democratically controlled General Assembly. And now there's a movement to repeal voter ID, and I just don't understand the basis for it. We need a voter ID, or excuse me, an ID to access a courthouse, a constitutional right. You need a voter ID to purchase a firearm. That's a constitutional right. And I just haven't seen the evidence that requiring an ID to vote has restricted people's ability to exercise that franchise, especially when you're able to cast a provisional ballot if you show up and you don't have an ID. The second issue that we're concerned about is the proposal to eliminate mail ballot certification. As you know, if you send in the mail ballot, it needs to be notarized, or it needs to be two witnesses. That is not a burden. I understand they did it during a pandemic. There was a health reason for that, but now they're trying to codify in law the elimination of that certification. And if you'll please note that with a mail ballot, you don't need to present an ID to get a mail ballot. So if they do eliminate the certification, there is no ID prior to voting, and there is no certification from witnesses or an independent notary. As I said in the beginning of this, elections are all about trust. We feel that many people in the state will lose an element of trust in our election system if these two laws pass, the elimination of voter ID and the elimination of mail ballot certification. And we just see that as very problematic for the future of our state, if people don't have trust in our elections. And that's what we're all here advocating. So I thank you everyone for coming out, and I'll see you along the way.
What is it about it that you don't have trust?
No, I didn't say I don't have trust. I said if you eliminate the requirements that ensure all elections are done lawfully, there could be people that lose trust in that election. You know, there's a reason why mail ballots, voting requires an ID. That gives a lot of people trust in the system. I don't mind showing my ID when I go to vote. I like it. And if we eliminate these protections, I feel that people will lose trust. Generally, not for any specific reason, which I think you're asking. Generally, may not trust the election process as much if there isn't a requirement to show ID.
Do you trust the process as it stands now?
I do. I didn't like what happened with the governor unilaterally nullifying General Assembly passed laws through executive order based on the state of emergency. The General Assembly was meeting at the time. We could have come back and consider these proposals, but I don't think our laws that protect our elections should be limited by fiat, executive fiat. So I didn't like what happened, but I like our laws now. I don't want to change them except to add the additional protection that our voting rolls do get cleaned up as a matter of law.
Representative Fillippi, the governor has haphazardly, ham-handedly claimed that a 70% inoculation rate will result, allegedly, purportedly, in the reopening of the state, the suspension of the executive order, and the restoration of our civil liberties. Is, in fact, the state of Rhode Island, in your opinion, ready to be reopened right now?
Yeah, my opinion is that we have been under a state of emergency for over a year, far too long. What happens if things get really bad? Are we going to say, okay, now it's a super duper state of emergency, or this is a real state of emergency? By keeping people in a state of emergency for this long, it loses its efficacy. I think it's clear that people are going to work, people are going out to restaurants, people are engaging in commerce. It's no longer an emergency such that the General Assembly should have delegated its legislative authority to the governor. That's what the purpose of a state of emergency is when the elected representatives cannot convene to pass laws. And we're doing that in 10 minutes. There's no way the governor should be exercising legislative authority anymore. Certainly, once everyone 55 plus who wants to be vaccinated is vaccinated, that executive order must terminate. They can't even tell us what the end looks like.
Right. Well, one quick follow-up. Rhode Islanders everywhere are frustrated with their inability to testify in person and the rather, again, I'll use the word ham-handed approach to remote testimony. There's multiple anecdotal tales of people not getting a call back, not even being sure if their testimony is being read. Is it time for the Rhode Island legislature to go back into full session and operate under at least somewhat normal means and allow people to testify in person?
In my opinion, yes. And absent that, we should not be passing laws that affect fundamental rights and also fundamentally change the way our government operates, like this Rhode Island Green New Deal that we're going to be passing now, where we delegate an immense amount of legislative authority to the executive branch, which will affect not every single, but many aspects of your life. That's going on today. We are sending a bill to the governor that empowers the executive branch and a bunch of unelected bureaucrats appointed by the governor to regulate anything and everything having to do with greenhouse gas emissions, what kind of heat you have in your home, what kind of car you can drive, potentially your food supply. It's a undefined, broad delegation of authority, and we're doing this when people can't even come in to testify. So, yeah, I think we should be back in. Absent that, our docket should be very limited.
Thank you.
Leader Fillippi, Rhode Island does not have voter rolls available with court dates. Other states, they do. In Rhode Island, all you get is the year. That was changed in 2017. Why is that, and what can be done about that?
So the reason that is because the Secretary of State made the decision that that was not something that had to be disclosed under the Access to Public Records Act, and that prevents people from doing data mining to see if there's dual registrations. It's wrong. The Providence Journal was right to sue the Secretary of State, and I hope they do prevail. Unfortunately, it's the wrong decision, and absent the General Assembly passing a law requiring that to be disclosed, it's up to the next Secretary of State, and that's assuming that the court doesn't agree with the Providence Journal.
Other states have outlawed ballot harvesting. Why does Rhode Island allow campaigns to register people to vote, get a ballot for them, and then collect the ballot?
Why? Because I think that mail ballots is the new master lever. With that said, I think that we should allow mail ballots, but we shouldn't have it be this kind of Wild West system that we have now. It doesn't breed faith in our election process. So I don't want to eliminate mail ballots. I just want to make sure that they're not problematic, and I think ballot harvesting is an issue, especially now where they're proposing to eliminate the signature notary requirements.
There are people that say no one is turned away from the Secretary of State's office who goes to register to vote and they're given a state ID. What is the oversight to see if people who are being registered to vote are legally eligible to be registered to vote?
So what is the oversight to ensure?
Yeah.
I mean, they have to sign an affidavit or a document under penalty of perjury.
Which has never been prosecuted in 25 years.
Beyond that, I don't know what the protections are. I also want to recognize Representative Price, Representative Quattrochi, who have joined us. and all the advocates standing behind us who so too believe in free, fair, and trustworthy elections. Does anybody else have any questions?
Just one quickly related to this. It's great to have you here, by the way, answering questions. We are about, as a state, about to see the single largest cash infusion that's not taxpayer generated per se in the state of Rhode Island history. Do you worry about the oversight of a multi-billion-dollar federal, what some folks have referred to as a free-for-all?
I mean, you'd be foolish not to worry about oversight of those monies. In a way, half of me is happy the monies are here, and the other half of me is upset, because we've been saying for a long time Rhode Island needs to get its fiscal house in order. We have taken action and made decisions over the past generations which aren't sustainable.
Right.
And this federal money is essentially giving another drink to a drunk with delirium tremens. At some point, the chickens are going to come home to roost, and this just delays the inevitable and the hard decisions that we need to make as leaders in this state.
Do we need to have the legislature have sort of a intervention in sense of reading the impact of the tobacco settlement and assessing what could potentially happen here in Rhode Island?
Yeah, I don't think that this money should be used to fund ongoing government, bloated ongoing government operations. If anything, it should be done for capital projects that are, have a 30-year life, or it should be refunded to the people who, frankly, are suffering a tax burden and an economy that is kicking families out of their homes and closing small businesses. I'd rather see all that money go to help Rhode Islanders than perpetuate our bloated system of government.
Final question. Dave Levesque, the owner of Brewed Awakenings, who I think is well known to everyone here, has got some legislation pending, or he's introduced legislation that would, I think, take a rather constructive approach to reintegrating folks into the workforce. Number one, do you consider that a model in terms of legislation in the sense that it involves stakeholders? And B, have you seen the legislation, and what do you think about it?
So I've spoken to Mr. Levesque. The guy knows what he's talking about. I want to see the finer details. I'm always cautious giving government money to individuals. I mean, I know we're doing that with unemployment that this is seeking to supplant. I got to see the finer details. I have an open mind to it. But he harps on a very, very important issue, and that is that people cannot find workers to get back to work. In many cases, you make more money on unemployment right now than you do going back to work. So why would you go back? I understand that. And so if there's a way to fix it and do it responsibly, I'm 100% on board.
Leader, what is your reaction to Major League Baseball deciding to pull the All-Star game out of Georgia? A big part of that seems to be mail ballots where you have to put your license, your social security number, or a state ID on it. There'd be no reason not to if you had one. But what about companies trying to bully a state into what their voting laws should look like?
I think they're just horrible business people. It's probably the stupidest decision you can make as a business person to get involved in politics. And it makes me not want to buy their products because what other things are they screwing up on? Like, why would you alienate a large portion of the country if your business model and your fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders is to sell products? I don't understand. I look at the Georgia voting laws, and there's probably some things to do differently, but a lot of the things people are complaining about, for instance, Chuck Schumer in New York, they have many of the same restrictions, if not more restrictive than this new Georgia voting law. So I think this is just wrong. I don't think that businesses should be involved in politics.